I joined the movement when I was 50. I went to jail when I was 18. As a result of that, I was expelled from high school. And I was one of the accused, together with Mandela, Sisulu and others, in the first treason trial, 1956 to 61. We were 156 accused, and finally we were 30 left, against whom they had maximum evidence and they thought they'd be able to secure conviction. So that continued until, from 56 until 61, when we were acquitted. The whole trial itself was an attempt to stifle the movement for change, liberation. And after 61, 1960, the ANC was declared illegal. And I'll give you a short little thing about why it was declared illegal. And by 61, we set up the ANC set up its military wing known as the Umkhonto, and meaning the spear of the nation. So by that time, in 61, Nelson Mandela, who became the commander-in-chief and who was the of the high command of the military wing, was sent abroad to get military training and also to garner some support for the movement. Now you will take into account that the ANC was founded in 1912. Incidentally, today is the 21st of March, and you know about the Sharpeville massacre. From 1912 until 1960, all attempts of non-violent resistance against the enemy, the adversary, the state, met with violence and more violence. So it was quite clear that if you want to change, you have to use different tactics. And the decision taken by the movement at the time was, now for example in 1960, even while our trial was taking place, the ANC was banned. 20,000 of our leaders and activists, I happen to be one of them, we were detained at the Pretoria Central Jail. And first we were kept at the Constitutional Hill. I don't know if you've been there, the fort. That was an old fort there. And so the ANC finally decided, look here, it's useless knocking on their doors just for the sake of being dismissed with contempt and all attempts that whatever you do will not be heeded. Because you must understand that the apartheid, the system of apartheid, wasn't just the humiliation and the oppression and the exploitation of a people purely on the basis of skin color, but it was economic exploitation. Apartheid was, in fact, 20th century slavery. And from the moment you were born until you died, your life was determined by the system. Well, finally, and here was a minority government that imposed it on the majority. And of course, they had also support from the international business community. Now you know that South Africa is the biggest producer of platinum in the world, gold, diamonds, and whatever it is. So Anglo-American corporation had tremendous stakes here and still have. So their idea was to maintain the system of super exploitation for their own benefits. But it was also taking into account that this happened immediately after the war. Now, what was the war for? The Second World War. It was against Nazism, against the master race ideology. However, the South Africans' brand of nationalism, particularly like Foster and company, they believed, in fact they were encouraged and inspired by the ideology of the Nazis. So much so that a former Prime Minister of South Africa was detained during the war for his pro-Nazi activities. And with the end of the war, 1945, the enemy no longer was Nazism. The enemy now became the Soviet Union. And there was this major, what do you call it? The two blocks. I won't go into the details about it, but it was the two blocks. So the South Africans were able to use, very conveniently, to say that, look here, we are the defenders of the faith. We are God's given, we have been ordained by a supreme being and placed on the African continent to look after the blacks who are just kids. You know, whether you were African, of Indian descent, or so-called colored, people. But the simple fact of the matter was that it was the economic exploitation of people. For example, they introduced, for example, in 1940, the so-called Iron Curtain came about. The enemy now was the Soviet Union. Whether people believe it in that or not, that's not another point. But they used the bogey of communism and said that the South African, the ANC is a communist front organization. That it is part of this international communist movement to establish a so-called communist dictatorship. Therefore, we must support the system because we are the defenders. By we, I mean not me. I'm talking about the powers that be. And so they continued with this thing. So when they introduced the so-called Suppression of Communism Act in 1950, they said the idea of communism, communism was so widely defined as to suggest that any two people getting together, if you define that law in other words, and the which people were banned, that anybody advocating any system that advances the question of a change in the socio-economic or political structure of South Africa was deemed to be advancing an object of communism. Now, I don't have the vote. All our black colleagues have to have the vote. We say that we want a change in the political structure, that we should be given the franchise. You are advancing an object of communism, so you are communist. Economically, we are exploited. There were separate jobs for blacks and whites. Skilled work, for example, no black could become an electrician or a builder. This was the exclusive reserve of white South Africans. So you are advocating a change in the economic structure. So you are advancing an object of communism. Comes the social setup. You are herded into ghettos. All this, wherever you are in the northern suburb, this is all for whites only. No blacks could be here. You are only there to serve the white masters. You understand? So you are herded into a ghetto and you say that the population is expanding. Now you go into your so-called locations. Now even looking into the economic, the South African society was so skewed that in normal society, in an industrial society, the workers are normally close to the point of production. It's easier for them. And the bosses are always living far apart because they want to be there. In the case of South Africa, the workers were pushed into their ghettos far away, either Soweto or some other place, and the forcible removal and the mass removal of hundreds and thousands of our people. So this was the position, and the movement, the ANC, which was, there were a lot of difficulties in the early days. We couldn't organize meetings. When the Congress of the People campaign took place, and when the Freedom Charter was adopted, we had to go about it under extremely difficult conditions. For example, let me just give you one insight. The pass laws. You might have heard about the pass laws. The pass laws was, the pass was applied only to Africans. That every African over the age of 16 at one stage had to carry on his or her person this document which had his name, her name, where the person was working, whether you paid your poll tax at all or not, are you in that industrial area, are you in that locality with a permit or without a permit. So these were the kind of things, the humiliation that continued. I mean, they come to economy. I mean, for example, talk about the mining industry, which was the backbone of this American economy. African workers, mine workers, were paid 20 times less than the white counterpart. So for every $1 the African got, his white counterpart got $50. You understand? So it was so blatant and so, and it was against this system of not only humiliation, but the assault on the dignity of human beings. The people got together and said no. And that is where the formation of the ANC took place in 1912. In 1912, and the African National Congress is the oldest political organization of the African continent. You see? And it has long experience. It is not the oldest political organization in South Africa, because in South Africa, in the Third Indian Congress, which was founded by Gandhi in 1894, so it predated that. But anyway, what I'm saying is that the ANC got together because in the old days there was resistance. The African people never accepted foreign subjugation. You know that people must be quite clear. And they said that in 1912, because with the formation of the Union in 1910, where Britain abdicated its responsibility and they handed over power to the white minority in 1910. And the first act they were going to pass was the 1913 Land Act, by which 87% of the land was earmarked for white occupation, which constituted less than 10 or 12% of the population. And 13% was earmarked for African people. And that was the most arid land you understand. But anyway, so the ANC was founded in 1912 and to fight against the injustices. And there were campaigns of resistance against the past laws, against whatever it was. Until 1960, and particularly an important phase of the movement was that, first of all, let me tell you, if you think I'm talking too much, just tell me. I'll stop it with questions. In the 50s, the major campaigns of resistance were organized by the ANC. For instance, the first genuine strike that was held in 1950 against the so-called suppression of communist land was organized by the ANC, the Transvaal and the Indian Congress and the Communist Party. That time the Communist Party was still legal. Comes and of course on May Day 1950, they opened fire and 18 of our people were shot and killed in a place called Alexander Township, not far from here. And there you see the clear demarcation of whites and blacks, etc. The whole of the 50s, then the ANC decided to embark on a campaign of defiance. The campaign, it was known as the Campaign for the Defiance of Unjust Laws. 6 laws were chosen to defy them. And the idea was to mobilize people, because until 1950, the ANC was a mass organization, but it was an organization that used to meet once a year in Bloemfontein Day, pass resolutions. We had the upper house, so the House of Chiefs and the House of Commons, etc. And continue. But it didn't become a mass movement. Unless you want to change the system, your organization must become a mass movement. It was mobilizing. And we got support, for example, from other parts of the world. The African Council, the American Council in Africa, under the late Paul Robeson, people like that. And later, Martin Luther King and who have you, they also were inspired by the movement, because the civil rights movement in the state was still in its infant stages, And so, 1952 Defiance Campaign. Now you must understand that within a matter of 6 months, it was organized by the ANC and the South African Indian Congress jointly. And that was done deliberately because in 1949, the state here had organized anti-Indian riots and said that the Indians were the enemies of the African people. And it was shown that this is a deliberate attempt on the part of the state to sow divisions, division of, getting people out and to divert your attention from the main enemy. So anyway, on the 26th of June 1952, Mandela led one of the batch of resistance. I was there when he left. And it was a question about, you can't be in the city after 9 o'clock at night. the city, in the country towns, and in the urban areas it was 11 o'clock at night. So if you were an African, a Mandela used to come to town, and if he wanted to be, was a guest of a white colleague, first of all, he wasn't allowed to stay there. It was a violation of the social laws here. But if he had to leave, the white colleague had to give him a little piece of paper and say, this is to allow Mr. Nelson Mandela, who was my friend, allow him to go home. Because after 11, because it was known as white by night. Because during the days they needed your labor, so you had to come here because you were black. In the country towns, the sirens used to go up at 9 o'clock, just as it used to happen during war years. Go to the bomb shelters. So this was so. But in a matter of 6 months, the ANC organized a campaign of defiance, and we called for 10,000 volunteers. And by the end of, just before the end of December, 8,500 to 9,000 people got into prison voluntarily and said. And what did they do? This is a white only bench. You can't sit here, so they went to sit there. You can't use this lift because the lift that it said non-whites and dogs use a different lift. For Europeans only on the side. You couldn't be. You go to a post office, a special site for the white, but you know about this segregation. So 8,500 to 9,000 people went to jail, and this put our cause, our campaign, and our struggle on an international footing. So internationally, the ANC became known, and also mass mobilization. Just one instance. The ANC in the Transvaal, that time we had 4 provinces. In the Transvaal had about 10,000 members. At the end of Defiance, it shot at 220,000. So it was a question. This is where the importance of people like Mandela, Walter Sisulu, J.B. Marx and others came in. They mobilized. And the point that was repeatedly emphasized was that this is the long and an arduous battle for freedom. Don't think that if you're going to go to jail, I mean, I took part in that campaign, I went to jail, that if you come out, you're going to get freedom there. No, this is only the beginning of a campaign. And our slogan was, freedom in our lifetime. And this was accepted. So, people became mobilized, they were politicized, etc. And in the meantime, the enemy, the state, went the opposite way and used method after method, measure after measure, to stifle this movement for change. But the more they did that, the more people came up. Because it was so patently unjust that people with any dignity had to come up. And therefore, and we emphasize the other thing, is that this fight is not a fight against whites as such. It is a fight against the system of human exploitation. And therefore, we said that this is a non-racial fight, and everybody must take part. So the Indians, the Africans, the colors, and the whites. And you'll see here, this thing will show you something that how people who were anti-white changed and became humanitarians. And said, no, this is the national liberation struggle. I mean, if you take Nelson Mandela himself, in the early stages, he said that no, it should be purely an African fight. Later on, he understood and realized that, oh, this is a fight. And not only an African fight, but it's also a fight of people who were anti-communist and communist and whatever it is. So the fight was against the system of human exploitation. So the whole of the 50s saw the Defiance Campaign, the Anti-Pass Campaign, the Congress of the People Campaign, when the Freedom Charter was adopted. It became a rallying call, like universal declaration of independence, etc. in the state. And we had, for example, the boycott campaign, potato boycott campaign, because people working on the farms in Vietnam, etc., Africans had to dig potatoes with their bare hands. Children were. So this, and all the attempts made by the government to stifle this movement was of no avail. And at the end of 1960, by 60, on the 21st of March, there was an organization known as the PAC, which split away from the ANC, and which had this, spoke about Africa, but the Africans only, etc. And people like Mandela and Sisulu and others. There are people who are here for over 300 years. Whether they are white, black, brown, yellow, whatever it is. This is not it's not a campaign, it's not a struggle for black and white. It's a struggle for human liberation. And people accepted that. So in 1960, they organized a campaign. The ANC was going to organize an anti-pass campaign in Berlin on the 31st of March, 1960. The PAC jumped the queue and decided to have their own campaign on the 21st of March. And they got these people, and innocent people were taken, because they were tired of the pass laws. Because the pass laws meant that at any time of the day or night, if you need to produce it, you went to jail. And let me tell you this too, that at the time, the largest prison population in the world, and South Africa's population at the time was about 8 or 10 million, for South Africa. If you take it internationally, over 150, 200,000 Africans used to be taken to jail annually, simply because the guy didn't have the pass. And let me just give you a simple instance of what the pass meant. If you left your pass in your house on a hot day, and you went to go and visit your neighbor on the other side, and the police van happened to pass by and said, "Careful, where's your pass?" And he said, "I don't have it on me." But he said, "Oh, no, why haven't you got it on you?" And you are picked up and taken to jail. You come to work, you've forgotten your pass at home because you're going to lose your job if you're going to be late. Where's your pass? At the station. And you will see some of those photographs over there. So so in 1960, when the anti-pass campaign was supposed to be launched, the PAC had this campaign, and they went to Sharpeville, and they had the history of it. 69 shot in cold blood, most of them in the back, and they were unarmed, peaceful, and 180 wounded. The upshot of this was the ANC called for a national stoppage of work for 3 days. Right? They say that there was cut it down. So,
Uncle Mosie, we just wanted an opportunity to ask questions.
Okay.
Because you're on a schedule, I got a lot of things to go.
Okay, no, it's okay. So anyway, from 1960, when the ANC was there, until 1990, we worked in exile. Those of us organized the international anti-apartheid movement. Many of you might have taken part in it if you were in the States, etc. And Mandela and I were sentenced to life imprisonment. I happened to be in exile. I escaped from jail, from Marshall Square, whatever it is. And we organized this thing. And finally, the day dawned, because it was a simple thing. The state was not able to maintain the system indefinitely. And the liberation movement was not in a position to overthrow the state because they were so well armed, etc. So there had to be a compromise, getting together. And that's where Kodesa comes into the picture, where he said that there should be a negotiated settlement. And that's what happened. Mandela was released on the 11th of February 1990. But we are here today. We've got a lot of difficulties as it is, criminal activity, the violence. But the most important thing that happened, that there was no civil war. There was no question about white going out and killing blacks and blacks and not white. On the whole, of course, there's been a lot of resentment, and especially those that maintained and had power. They didn't want, nobody, when you've got power, want to give up that power. So they didn't want to, and still, I mean, and in the States, you know it exactly what it means. So, today we are now here. We're going to go to election next year, and I'm sure that the ANC is also going to come. A lot of difficulties, but the pivotal part, I am not saying that the ANC was the only organization that played a part, but it played the most important. It spearheaded the movement of the nation. And therefore, we are quite certain that next year, when the election takes place, we'll be back into power, but we have got a lot of work to do to see that things are changing. Okay, it's yours. Yes, sir.
My question is, obviously, some of us are at your stage in our lives. You were already a revolutionary. So what role do you see for us as far as this new world is, as far as bringing about change in the world?
Internationally?
Internationally, yeah, internationally. And as far as how do you see the world now? How do you feel? What kind of advice would you give to us?
It's a hell of a it's a hell of a question. We need quite a few hours to discuss this. But the point is this, that we know it's a world where you have the haves and the have-nots. And it's a major struggle because in every society, and it's different, it depends on the society itself to develop. It has taken a hell of a long time for Afro-Americans to be where they are today. If I told you 20 years ago that you will have a black president in the state, people would have said you must be nuts. Impossible, that's it. And it is, and even now, even with the black president that you have, the situation continues. The blacks are still the most, the underdogs, etc. And then the same thing in South Africa. It's going to take. You see, for example, you talk of Bantu education. I want to show you. I just want to tell you something about it. Bantu education was a system that was devised by the then government and by the late Dr. Verwoerd, who was one of the architects of the market. And he said that when he piloted this bill in Parliament, he was then Minister of Native Affairs in the early 50s. He says the idea of Bantu education is to teach the native his place in society. And his place in society is virtually that he will be a Yugo wood and a tall water. The native mustn't come to the white man's location, area, pastures, to come there and enjoy himself. So therefore, all he needs is to do menial work. Science, mathematics, etc. is not for him. He's not, he's not developed. He can't, he's a little child, So he must be able to take the commands of the master. So a child is at school. Now first of all, there were 4 types of education: African, Indian, colored, and white. The government spent $1,800 per annum. I'm talking of the 50s and 60s and 70s, per capita on a white child. $90 on an African child. $200, $250 on an African and Indian child. The teacher-student ratio was 20 to 1 in the white schools, 50, 60, 70 to 1 in African schools, 35, 40 to 1 in Indian schools. Teachers were differently paid. White teacher was getting the highest, African the lowest, etc. So it's and the whole idea was to make in other words, it was education for ignorance. The madam used to come, the teacher used to come to class and said, "Now, children, I'm going to teach you how to do washing. This is washing powder. This is a bucket of water. You have to use so much of it. School kids, you understand?" And that was, and therefore today you have all the different. We are not playing, the ignorance, the society, the uprising in Soweto, etc., was because of this system. And like that it went on. So anyway, what was our job? I was in exile from 1963 until 1990. I worked very closely with our late president, Oliver Tambo, and the others. And our job was to international mobilization. The simple thing was that in South Africa, you had the internal struggle, and also to mobilize the military campaign, because you had to bring some sense into the end. You understand? And we managed beautifully. It was a hard and a difficult battle that no other movement in the history of the world had garnered so much of support as the South African struggle. You went to any part of the world, whether it was the United States, the Soviet Union, go to Cambodia, go to Vietnam, they didn't know about South Africa, but you mentioned the name Mandela and they knew about it. You understand? And that is how we were able, and the South African government was isolated in the fields of sports, economy, etc. And it was beginning to reel under this boycott system. And So finally, a stage was reached where both sides could not subdue the other. And that is where the question about negotiations came into. And talks began when Mandela was already in jail and in the 80s. And finally, in 90, he was, I was at a meeting, I know, when in Athens, and we had what is known as the Mandela session, for that 1 year. And there were a lot of delegates from the United States, etc. And news came that Mandela was going to be released at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And most of those people had taken part in this campaign for the release of Mandela. So it was a very moving moment that Mandela was going to be released. And let me, please.
In your most difficult and darkest moment during the struggle, what kept you going? In the times when the fight was the most difficult and the darkest during the apartheid movement for you, what kept you going? What made you keep fighting?
Well, one thing is that, as I said, our slogan was at the time, freedom in our lifetime, and a change in society. Now, you've attained what is known as the political kingdom. Kwame Nkrumah said, seek ye first the political kingdom, and then the economic kingdom. So we got the political kingdom, now we have to. There's a new war, and the war is against inequality, unemployment, poverty, etc., etc. And that has to be. And if the ANC fails, let me make this thing quite clear, if the ANC fails in addressing those basic questions, you are going to have what are known as the Arab Springs, etc. And you're going to have another social upheaval. If not in 10 years or 20 years time, but further. But if you look at the South African setup, and you know what the conditions were and how things have changed, we are on the right path. We have got massive problems to solve. We have to solve the problems of jobs. South Africa has got about 5 million people are unemployed. More than that, in a small population of 50 million people. You understand? You've got housing backlog. South Africa is the only country that the state builds homes for the homeless. Not the best of homes, but at least, but we've got electricity, power and water, etc. Whereas before, people in the countryside used to walk for miles or kilometers to bring a bucket of water. Now water has been brought to their homes. So these are major achievements in the short space of time of 18, 19 years. But a lot has to be done. And unless those things are dealt with, and it should be on the war footing, like immediately after the war, West Germany, Germany was decimated. You had the Marshall Aid Plan, and within a matter of years, they were able to rebuild. But in the case of South Africa, you had an industrial society. There was education. Those people were skilled. Our people were not skilled. As I told you, you couldn't become an electrician if you were that person. You couldn't become a car mechanic. You couldn't build. So now how do you build a new life? It takes time, but that time has also got the limit. You can't keep on telling people you're going to build your home or you're going to, your lives are going to get better. You must be able to see that. Yes, madam.
Were you able to vote in the first democratic elections, and what was that experience like for you?
Oh, it was a wonderful experience. For what you've been fighting for over the years, it's a look, I must have the right to vote. And you take that, and therefore if you look at some of those pictures of lines and kilometers of people queuing up 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning to be there to vote. It was a wonderful experience. When you cast your vote and you came out and said that, okay, this is the South Africa what you were fighting for. Here comes Madiba. For the first time in his life, well, how old was he in 1990? Anyway, he was about 75. For the first time in his life, he could cast his vote. And like that, Chief Lutuli, the first Nobel Peace Prize winner on the African continent, unfortunately couldn't vote because he died in 1967 in a very mysterious way. So it was a thing. But now you can't just sit on that. well, we've had quite a few elections. Every 5 years, petitions are. So you'll ask people and they say, look here, man, it's good enough that you thought about freedom, there's democracy, we can vote every time, we don't have to have the passes, etc. But nevertheless, we have to go ahead and you will see that basic and fundamental changes take place. Please.
So we have been studying the South African Constitution, and we very much look to it as just a prototype for really progressive policy and beautiful policies, but we've also noticed that there's been a lack of implementation. And I wonder, do you think that that lack of implementation under the ANC is because although when it comes to theory, they look at other democracies, but when it comes to practicum, they only had the example of the apartheid government, where there was a lot of corruption, a lot of a minority taking the majority of rights, of money, of land. Do you think that example is what stifles implementation under the ANC?
Yeah, no. See, the South African Constitution has taken the best from a lot of constitutions in the world, and it is one of the best in the world. There's no question about it. But you see, you don't live, you don't just eat by the Constitution. That Constitution has to be made into a reality. People down there must be able to feel that this thing, what we fought for, is changing our lives. And unless they feel changes. Now the ANC has been a mess. You had communists, anti-communists, non-communists. It's a broad church who have taken part because of the common enemy at the time. You were all, whether you were a communist, non-communist, a worker, student, lawyer, you were all victims of the system. Now that has been done away with. You have to, the parting of the ways is now coming. You understand? It's becoming more class-based interest. Workers will take, Cosatu is there, the others are on the other side. In Mexico you had what party is this? The Revolutionary Institute Party or something like that. It was in power for nearly 60 or 70 years. Finally people got rid of it. So the ANC must not think that they are going to be here for eternity and that people are ready. If they want to be here for eternity, they must come out with policies and implementation of policies. If you don't do that, forget about it. And already the opposition here can take advantage of it. There's a Democratic Alliance, there are other organizations, and if the ANC doesn't take into account exactly what the hell is taking place, you are going to lose votes, and we will lose votes. People are disgusted with the corruption that is taking place, etc. There, I'm getting a sign from the other side that they want to get away from it.
Mr. Okay, take the last question there.
There you are.
Looking in from the outside, it seems like reconciliation was a very noble way of getting beyond the apartheid era. For those of you that fought so hard for liberation and saw many of your brothers and comrades killed by apartheid governments, and were yourselves abused and imprisoned and exiled for decades, for you personally, what was your response to reconciliation?
Oh, that's good. Because as I said earlier, the question about, we could have continued. The ANC could have continued with its policy and said, okay, we'll have guerrilla warfare here, and then there will be killing, and then we will eventually take over. There is a question about the victor and the vanquished. But the reality of the situation was that you were not in a position to totally overthrow the state because it was so powerful. And the state was in the same position that you were not in a position to continue with the subjugation and the exploitation. Therefore, it dawned upon them already in the 80s. Already in the 80s, there was already talk, and there were contacts made between them. When Mandela was in jail, there were some secret talks that look here. And outside, and also the fact that the United States and other countries, where they had them, they realized the importance that look here. If we don't do anything now, you are going to be sitting on a powder keg. And to avoid that thing. So finally the question was, and whether people like it or not, reconciliation, in the case of South Africa, was the most sensible thing to do. Because it brought people together. It was, and you negotiated, not as a victor and a vanquished, but but you negotiated it as equals. You understand? And you made the others feel that, okay, there was no question about putting the whites into the sea, or they would all leave South Africa. They've been here for 300 years, man. For heaven's sake, where do you send them to? The same thing with South Africans of Indian descent have been here for over 150 years. We are in the second, third, fourth generation South African. You understand? And the same thing. And then when people came, so this is it. So when it came to the question about reconciliation, and the most important thing, the most profound, there's been no civil war, there's no bloodbath. Whites didn't come out with their bloody guns. Blacks didn't come out with their AK-47s and start going down. We didn't have a Bosnia type of situation. You see? And if people can talk about the politics that, no, you gave in here, you gave in too much, etc. But the overall picture is that of human advancement. Today blacks can, you see, if earlier, in the 60s and 70s, if a black and white walked together on the street, you would be hounded, and literally beat you up. Today, it's accepted. People accept it. It's human. It's human for black and white to live together and whatever it is. So that's reconciliation. But it also depends on our white compatriots here. And when Mandela came out in 1990, and when he spoke to that massive crowd of 500,000 people in Cape Town, and Robben Island is just across, and he extends a hand of friendship. He could have said, kill the whites, burn them bloody hell. There are a lot of animals here who wanted that to happen. No. He extended a hand of friendship, but that hand of friendship has to be reciprocated. Our white compatriots has to come and accept, because still, it's the same thing happening in the States. But incidentally, let me just tell you, that although in the United States, thousands and millions of people supported our cause, there were also those that supported the apartheid state, economically and otherwise. The CIA particularly played a very important part to keep our names away to the enemy. And Mandela, it is said that when Mandela was picked up in the Howick, his name was handed over by CIA informer. So you have to deal with the CIA too. But I hope that explained, because this reconciliation in fact they are talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the fact that we've given, a chap has killed 190 people in cold blood, in flat class, and he's today outside, he's walking on. What do? Do you go and kill him and say that you've redeemed yourself and that you are now able to live better, etc.? You've got to fight, man. Okay.
Next question. Okay, somebody here.
One more, please.
I was going to ask something similar. I was going to just ask whether you had started the movement when you were age 15, and it started as a peaceful participation. Was the decision to participate in like the Umkhonto Way and the armed resistance kind of movement more difficult than the decision to try to forgive post-independence?
Yes, it was. Simply because, once the organization is banned, you have to work much more, of course, clandestine activities. Yeah. The second thing is that the struggle as such, our mass struggle wasn't abandoned. We fought on two fronts. One was the internal and the external. The external was international mobilization, boycotts, etc., and to isolate and weaken the enemy. Internally was to mobilize the masses of the people to fight, because you don't give freedom on a platter to people. And if you do that, they don't appreciate it. They have to fight, and they must know what the bloody battle was about. You understand? Today, a lot of people, take it for granted. No, we needed this thing. It was our God-given right that we have to be free. They don't understand what sacrifices that were made. I can tell you about two of my friends. One who saw me off at the border in Botswana. A year later, after seeing me, when I went into exile, he was picked up and he was tortured and and thrown down the 8-story building and said that he protest was made. You understand? And there's that Steve Biko. You heard about Steve Biko, what happened in Victor. He spoke on it. And the others, and those guys are here. The chap that were, one of the guys, Dirk could see, just a few days ago died. He was responsible for setting up this commando unit, you know, not far from Pretoria. They used to kill people, blow up, dynamite them, and having a barbecue on the side. Now you see, and that is where that's the point, that white South Africans must appreciate that this is a friendship. That this is what happened. You know, you think, like, no, when the revenge is a hell of a thing. Someone, you know, the honor killings that take place in Afghanistan and all that, generation after generation, you understand? Here, you are living here, man, and you can build, and you can, people are accepting, you know. And white South Africans must accept the fact that we're a minority. And if things get better. But black South Africans also realize that you cannot build a society without the other side. And that is the point of reconciliation.